We can move on to verse 29. Don't devise harm against your neighbor while he lives in security beside you. We could apply that into other words of the New Testament and say, be rooted in goodness towards others. Be rooted in a good attitude towards others at all times. And do not contend with a man without cause if he has done you no harm. Now we see here there were certain things there which make it clear that Proverbs is still an Old Testament book. And here's one verse like that. Don't contend with a man if he has done you no harm. What if he has done you some harm? Then according to the Old Testament you can do something about it, but according to the New Testament you still can't do anything about it. Because Jesus said, if somebody slaps you on one cheek, turn the other. And I was interested to see this phrase, do not contend with a man, don't argue with a man, don't get into a quarrel with a man without a cause. Means that back in the Old Testament, if there was a cause, you could get into a contention with a man. And when you turn over to the New Testament in Matthew chapter 5, there's something very interesting. It says in Matthew 5 verse 22, but I say to you, Jesus said, everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. Now shall I tell you something about the people who copied the scriptures in the early days? They felt that can't be right. How can a man live without anger? And so they inserted something from Proverbs 3 verse 30 into that verse. And you'll find that in the King James Version. If you read it in the King James Version, it reads like this. I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother without a cause shall be guilty. Well, that's a very nice escape hole from which we can always escape when we get angry. Because there's no one in the world who's angry without a cause, unless he's a madman or somebody in a lunatic asylum. Everybody's angry with a cause only. I mean, have you ever heard of a man being angry without a cause? Do you mean to say that all this fantastic teaching of Jesus was ultimately just to be watered down completely with one little phrase, without a cause? Yeah, and it says in the margin of the NASB, some manuscripts have inserted without a cause because they felt the standard of Jesus was too high. And that teaches us one thing, that if you don't have faith for that, you won't get it. If you have faith that you'll get victory only over anger without a cause, then that's all we'll get. But if we have faith that we'll get victory over anger with or without a cause, then we get that. And that's what Jesus spoke. But in the Old Testament, that wasn't the standard. In the Old Testament, the standard was, don't contend with a man without a cause. But in the New Testament, Jesus said, but I say to you, don't be angry with your brother. Otherwise, you're guilty. So that's just an interesting thing we can see. And then to verse 31 of Proverbs 3, it says here, don't envy a man of violence. That means a lawless man, a man who doesn't keep the laws, who makes profit by cheating, who increases his income by telling lies. Don't envy him. Don't envy a lawless man. You find other people in your office doing things which are not righteous, and they're making money. They're cheating the office or the government or whatever it is by schemes and methods which you as an upright Christian won't adopt, and they're making money, and you're finding it difficult. Don't envy him. It's so easy to begin to think, what a lot I'm losing by not doing what these other people are doing. Nobody's catching them. Yeah, there we can easily envy them. Don't choose any of his ways. Don't choose the ways of a man who's doing wrong. Students, when you see other people copying, when you know the question paper has leaked, and there's a scramble to get the question paper, there you'll find a true Christian student who say, never mind if it's leaked, I don't want to see it. What an attitude. You know that everybody else is going into the examination hall having seen the question paper, but you are following Jesus. Do you think Jesus would go looking for that leaked question paper? No. Well, neither are we going to do it. Don't choose his ways. Because, verse 32, here are the reasons. The crooked man is an abomination to the Lord. You want to be an abomination to the Lord? Just to get high marks in the examination? Just to make a little more money in the office? The crooked man is an abomination to the Lord. But he is intimate with the upright. He's a close friend of the upright. Yeah, I want to be a close friend of God. Then be upright. The curse of the Lord is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the dwelling of the righteous. You see, it's very easy to put up a plaque on the wall saying, bless this house, O Lord, we pray. But he's not going to bless every house, even if you hang a plaque there. Because it says he only blesses the house of the righteous. It's the people who live there that determine whether God can bless the house. He's not interested in the windows and the walls and the doors. He's not blessing that. The home. The people who live there, if they are righteous, whether they hang a plaque or not, God blesses the house still. But if the people are not righteous, any number of plaques they hang around the wall, it's not God's not going to bless them. That's just superstition. If you are righteous, the blessing comes automatically. He blesses the dwelling of the righteous. And there's a difference in the word used here. And in the original Hebrew, there's a contrast. The house of the wicked means the great mansion of the wicked. And the dwelling of the righteous in the original Hebrew is a small little cottage of that righteous man. He could not make so much money. But God's blessing is there. Think of that, brothers and sisters. To live in a house and have the blessing of the Lord upon us. Because we seek to be righteous. And then we come to this verse which is quoted by Peter. He scoffs at the scoffers, but he gives grace, that New Testament word grace, to the afflicted, which is quoted by Peter in 1 Peter 5:5 and by James in James chapter 4 verse 6. He gives grace to the humble, but he resists the proud. He resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And so we see that grace is given by God. We don't need to speak much about that. We've spoken much about that in the church. God resists the proud, so don't seek the fellowship of the proud. He gives grace to the humble, seek fellowship with the humble. There's a verse in a book written by this man called Sirach, where he says, as when you touch tar, you know tar which they put on the roads, if you touch it, it dirties your hand in such a way that it's so difficult to remove that tar that's come onto your hand. In just the same way, he says, if you have fellowship with a proud man, you will be defiled in the same way. It comes onto you. It's very difficult to remove that. And therefore, if you're wise, you'll seek fellowship with humble people, with lowly minded people, and you'll avoid contact with the proud and the haughty. And that's the word of warning we need for our day. The wise will inherit honor, but fools will inherit shame or dishonor. And then chapter 4 verse 1. He says, hear, O sons. Now he's speaking to a number of people who are willing to take their position in submission. We notice this phrase, hear, O son, listen, O son, coming again and again in these first few chapters, indicating, as I said in our last study, a principle of submission to spiritual authority. That God tests our submission in the home and in the church. Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father. When we are willing to humble ourselves and listen to those who have more wisdom than us, and don't become proud and wise in our own eyes, and we are willing to hear, and we are willing to take the place of a son under a father, and don't think, that's disgraceful. How can I take that position? Then there is a possibility of our getting wisdom, and there our humility is tested. Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father, and it's not our heavenly Father, it's Solomon speaking. And give attention that you may gain understanding. For I give you sound teaching and do not abandon my instruction. And now he tells us something very interesting. When I was a son to my father, Solomon says, there was a time when I was also young and I had to learn something from someone who was spiritually superior to me, and that was my father David. You know that David was a man after God's own heart. And he says, when I was a son to my father, tender, as far as we know, we don't know definitely, but possibly Solomon was David's last son. And the only son in the sight of my mother. And you know his mother was Bathsheba. Think of that. That the son of Bathsheba was the one whom God chose to be the next king. That's tremendous grace of God, and Solomon never forgot that. Solomon knew how his mother got married to David. The whole history of that wasn't something to be very proud of. There he saw something of the grace of God. And the only son in the sight of my mother. Then David taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. David was the one who told Solomon first to keep the commandments. Think what a father he was. And it's very interesting because when you turn to 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 6, we read that David had a number of other children, and one of those sons was called Adonijah. And it says about Adonijah in 1 Kings 1:6 that his father David had never displeased him, never pained him, by even asking him even once, why have you done that? And David had another rebellious son like that called Absalom, another wicked son who raped his sister called Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah. David had a whole lot of sons. Perhaps he treated all of them like that, wouldn't pain them, wouldn't rebuke them, and he saw the damage they brought in his home, and he decided to do it differently with his last son, Solomon. And no wonder God picked up Solomon, because his father brought up one of his sons rightly. And so, there we can understand the background of what David tells Solomon. Keep my commandments and live. Proverbs 4:5. Acquire wisdom. Acquire understanding. And when Solomon finally became the king, and God asked him one night, what do you want? He said, Lord, give me wisdom. Who taught him to pray that prayer? It was David. There we see, it wasn't Solomon's own idea. It was David who told him, acquire wisdom, acquire understanding. Don't forget, no, turn away from the words of my mouth. Don't forsake wisdom. Wisdom will guard you. Love wisdom, and wisdom will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom, which means determination to be wise is the first step towards becoming wise, the Living Bible says. Determination to be wise is the first step. I'm going to get wisdom at any cost. And with all your acquiring, get understanding. Prize wisdom and she'll exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She'll place on your head a garland of grace, and then you'll be a real king. She'll present you with a crown of beauty. There we understand how Solomon became wise, because his father instructed him. Think that we can be fathers like that to our children. David learned through all his folly with his other sons to train up one son right.